At dinner, my billionaire son slid me a check across the table and said, "This covers everything you ever spend on me." The restaurant went quiet. The waiter froze mid-step. The piano player missed a note. Even the clinking glasses stopped. The check was thick. Cream paper. His company logo at the top. More zeros than I had ever seen in my life. And my son, Ethan Miller, the boy I once carried on my hip while working double shifts at a diner in Dallas, Texas, leaned back in his chair like he had just won a game. He smiled. Cold. Proud. Distant. "This should settle your investment," he added. "Principal plus interest." Investment. That word hit harder than the number on the check. My hands were shaking, but I didn't touch it. Because he wasn't just paying me back. He was erasing me. And what I did next he never saw coming. But before I tell you that part, before I tell you how that night ended, and why the entire city of Dallas would soon whisper my name, you need to understand how we got there. So, if you believe parents are disposable once their children get rich, if you believe money can replace sacrifice, stay with me. Like this story, if you believe respect matters more than dollars. And if you want to see how pride can destroy a fortune overnight, subscribe because what happened next changed everything. My name is Linda Miller. I am not a billionaire. I never went to college. I raised my son alone. Ethan was born in a small hospital in Fort Worth. His father left before Ethan turned 2. No child support. No birthday cards. Nothing. It was just me and my boy. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment with yellow walls and a broken heater. In winter, I would wrap him in 2 blankets and pretend we were camping.
He believed me.
I worked mornings at a diner and nights cleaning offices. I slept 4 hours a day, sometimes less. But every night, I read to him. Every single night. He was smart. Too smart for that little public school. His teachers would call me in and say, "Mrs. Miller, your son is gifted." Gifted. I held on to that word like it was gold. When he was 16, he built a small app in our living room. I didn't understand it. Something about online payments. But I understood his eyes. They were hungry. Not for food. For something bigger. I took out a second mortgage on the tiny house I had finally managed to buy. I drained my savings. I sold my wedding ring. The one his father left behind. "Are you sure, Mom?" he asked. I smiled. "I believe in you." That was the last time I saw softness in his face. The app grew. Investors called. He moved to Austin, then to Silicon Valley. He dropped out of college. Started a tech company. Within 5 years, he was on magazine covers. Youngest self-made billionaire in Texas. He bought a mansion in Highland Park. He bought cars I couldn't pronounce. He bought a private jet. And for a while, he still called me. "Mom, you don't have to work anymore." "Mom, I'll send money." "Mom, you deserve better." I didn't want better.
I wanted my son.
But the calls got shorter. Then they turned into texts. Then assistants started calling instead. "Mrs. Miller, Mr. Miller is very busy." Mr. Miller. Not Ethan. Mr. Miller. He invited me to business events, but only if I dressed appropriately. He hired a stylist for me once. Told me not to talk too much. "Just smile, Mom. Let me handle the conversations." I told myself he was stressed. Rich people must live differently, I thought. Then came the dinner. He said it was a celebration. Big acquisition, his assistant told me. The restaurant was the most expensive place in Dallas. Chandeliers. White tablecloths. Men in suits that cost more than my house. I felt small walking in. Ethan stood when I arrived, but he didn't hug me. He air-kissed my cheek. "You look nice," he said.
Nice.
Dinner was quiet. He talked about stocks, mergers, private equity. I nodded like I understood. Then dessert came. He pulled out the envelope. Slid it across the table. "That's for you." I thought maybe it was something sweet. A vacation. A house. But when I opened it, my breath stopped. It was a check for $3.2 million. And at the bottom, in the memo line, it said, "Full repayment." The men at the table chuckled. One of them said, "Guess that makes you officially independent now, Linda." Independent. Like I had been a debt. like motherhood had an invoice. I looked at my son. He didn't look at me. "I don't want you thinking I owe you anything," he said calmly. "This way, everything's clean."
Clean.
He wiped me out of his story with one piece of paper. And that's when I realized something terrifying. He truly believed money could cancel love. I felt my chest burn. My eyes filled. But I refused to cry in that room. Instead, I did something no one expected. I stood up. The entire table looked at me. I picked up the check. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I looked at my son, really looked at him. At the expensive watch on his wrist. At the pride in his eyes. At the arrogance sitting on his shoulders like a crown. And with steady hands, I tore the check in half.
The room gasped.
But I wasn't finished. Because what I said next made his face go pale. And what I revealed in front of those investors. It was something he had buried deep. Something that could destroy more than just our relationship. It could destroy his empire. I opened my purse. And I pulled out a document. His lawyer's face went white the second he saw it. Ethan stood up, so fast his chair fell backward. "Mom, what are you doing?" But it was too late. Because the document in my hand wasn't about money.
It was about ownership.
And I had just decided to use it. The paper in my hand was shaking. Not because I was scared, but because I was angry in a way I had never been before. Ethan stared at me like I was holding a bomb. "Mom," he said quietly, forcing a smile for the table. "Let's not do this here." His lawyer, Mr. Bradley, stood halfway from his chair. "Mrs. Miller, perhaps we can discuss this privately." Privately. That word again. Everything with Ethan was always private now. Controlled. Managed. Filtered. I looked around the table at the men who had laughed when he called my motherhood an investment. "No," I said softly. "We'll do this right here." The restaurant felt smaller. The air thicker. I placed the document gently on the white tablecloth. "Before you became a billionaire," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Before the magazine covers, before the jet, there was a contract." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You remember the first investor meeting?" I continued. "You were 19. You were nervous. You said no one would take you seriously without a legal structure." One of the investors leaned forward. Ethan's voice dropped. "Mom, stop." But I didn't. "You asked me to sign as a founding partner," I said. "You said you needed someone you trusted. You said, 'It's just paperwork, Mom. It doesn't mean anything.'" I smiled, but there were tears behind it. It meant everything. Mr. Bradley finally spoke. "Mrs. Miller, that early filing was amended years ago." "Was it?" I asked calmly. Because what I held in my hand wasn't just the original filing. It was the certified copy from the Texas Secretary of State's office. Stamped.
Sealed.
Never fully dissolved. And the room knew it. One of the investors grabbed the document. His eyes scanned the page. His face slowly changed. "Ethan," he said carefully, "this says she owns 15%. Silence. 15%. Of a billion-dollar company." I didn't even understand what that meant until I saw their faces. Ethan stood up fully now. His voice lost its polish. That was symbolic. It was never activated. I tilted my head. "Show me where it says that." He couldn't. Because it didn't. Back then, he trusted me completely. He never imagined we would sit at opposite sides of a table like enemies. The investor cleared his throat. "If this wasn't properly bought out." Mr. Bradley whispered something urgently in Ethan's ear. I watched my son's confidence flicker for the first time in years. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was a reminder. You don't erase the woman who helped build the foundation. Ethan looked at me differently now. Not like a burden. Like a threat. "Mom," he said through clenched teeth, "you don't even know what you're doing." I swallowed. He was right. I didn't understand stocks or acquisitions. But I understood promises. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said. The restaurant manager approached nervously. Other diners were staring. Ethan forced a laugh. "Gentlemen, this is just a family misunderstanding." But one of the older investors shook his head slowly. "Family misunderstandings don't usually involve equity disputes." The word dispute echoed like thunder. For the first time, Ethan looked young again. Not powerful. Just a boy who didn't think his mother would ever stand up. I leaned closer to him. I didn't come here to take your company, I whispered so only he could hear. I came here to remind you who you are. His eyes hardened. You're making a mistake. No, I said. You did. When you tried to pay me off. I gathered my purse and stepped away from the table. Behind me, voices rose. Investors arguing. Lawyers whispering. Chairs scraping. Ethan called after me. If you walk out that door with this, you'll regret it. I paused. For a second, I almost turned back. Because he was still my son. The boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder. The boy who once cried when I worked too late. But then I remembered the memo line. Full repayment. I walked out. The night air hit my face.
Cool.
Sharp. My hands finally started shaking for real. I got into my old Toyota and sat there for a long time. What had I just done? I didn't want his money. I didn't want his empire. I wanted respect. The next morning the calls started. Unknown numbers. News outlets. Business blogs. Someone at that table had leaked the story. Billionaire CEO faces ownership questions from mother. My face was on television by noon. They called it a family power struggle. They didn't call it humiliation. They didn't call it heartbreak. Ethan's stock price dipped 3% in one day. 3%. The media said it was minor. But inside the company, it was panic. By afternoon, I received a formal letter from his legal team. They were requesting an emergency meeting. I didn't answer. Instead, I drove to the small house I still lived in. I sat at the kitchen table where Ethan once did homework. I touched the scratches on the wood. Memories flooded in. I wasn't trying to destroy him. I just wanted him to see me. That evening, there was a knock at my door. Not a polite knock. A hard one. When I opened it, Ethan stood there. No suit jacket. No smile. Just anger. Get in the car, he said. Excuse me? We need to fix this before tomorrow. Fix what? You embarrass me. Embarrassed. The word almost made me laugh. You tried to buy my motherhood, I said quietly. He stepped closer. You have no idea what's at stake. I held his gaze. Then explain it to me. For a moment, I saw something flash in his eyes. Not arrogance.
Fear.
But it vanished quickly. If you push this, he said, investors will panic. Deals will collapse. People will lose jobs. He was good. Very good. He made it sound like I was the villain. Did you think about that when you handed me that check? I asked. His silence answered me. He ran a hand through his hair. What do you want? There it was. The question. Not are you hurt? Not are you okay? Just a negotiation. I took a deep breath. I want my son back. He looked away. That's not how this works. And that was the moment I understood something deeper. Money hadn't just changed his lifestyle. It had changed his heart. Headlights suddenly flooded the street. 2 black SUVs pulled up behind his car. Men stepped out. Not friendly looking. Not media. Not neighbors. Ethan's face went pale. He turned to me quickly. Go inside. Lock the door. My stomach dropped. Who are they? But he didn't answer. One of the men shouted his name. Not politely. Not respectfully. The kind of tone you use when you own someone. And that's when I realized. This wasn't just about a check. This wasn't just about pride. My son's empire was standing on something unstable. And whatever was inside those black SUVs. It wasn't here for dinner. One of the men pulled out a folder. Another lifted something from the back seat. Metal.
Cold.
Handcuffs. And they weren't looking at me. They were looking at Ethan. Mr. Miller, one of them called out, flashing a badge. We have a federal warrant. The words sliced through the night. Ethan whispered one thing under his breath. Mom, I didn't think they'd come this fast. And before I could even process what that meant, they grabbed him. And I watched my billionaire son get pushed against his own car. They pushed my son against the hood of his own car. His cheek pressed against the cold metal. The same son who once slept with a nightlight because he was afraid of the dark. Flashlights cut through the quiet street. One agent read from a paper. Ethan James Miller, you are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and falsifying financial statements. The words didn't sound real. Fraud? Falsifying? My ears rang. Neighbors' porch lights turned on one by one. Curtains moved. Phones came out. Ethan didn't fight. He just closed his eyes for a second. Mom, he said softly, without turning his head, go inside. I stepped forward instead. There must be a mistake, I said. My voice felt small. The agent looked at me, not unkindly. Ma'am, we have a federal warrant issued by the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas.
Court.
Warrant. Federal. This was bigger than a bad investment. They cuffed him. The sound of metal closing around his wrists broke something inside me. I remembered tiny plastic handcuffs from a Halloween costume when he was 5. He had dressed as a police officer. Now real ones locked around him. Reporters arrived fast. Too fast. Cameras. Microphones.
Shouting.
Mr. Miller, did you inflate earnings? Is it true investors were misled? Did your mother trigger the investigation? That question hit me like a slap.
Did I?
The agents guided him toward one of the black SUVs. For 1 second, he looked at me. Not angry. Not proud. Just scared. And in that moment, he wasn't a billionaire.
He was my boy.
The SUV door slammed shut. And just like that, the richest man in our county disappeared into the night. The next morning, his face was everywhere.
San.
Fox News. Local Dallas stations. Tech mogul arrested in federal fraud probe. They showed footage of him being taken away. They showed me standing in my yard, frozen. They called me co-founder mother. I didn't want that title. I wanted my son safe. By noon, his company's stock collapsed. Not 3%. 37%. Investors panicked. Employees stood outside headquarters in downtown Dallas, crying. The board announced an emergency suspension. His private jet was grounded. His accounts were frozen. And I sat at my kitchen table staring at the TV like I was watching someone else's life. Around 3 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. Mrs. Miller? A calm voice asked. This is Daniel Harper from Harper & Cole Defense Group. I've been retained to represent your son. I swallowed. Is he? He's being processed. There will be a detention hearing tomorrow at the federal courthouse. Federal courthouse. I had never even had a parking ticket. Can I see him?
I asked.
There was a pause. He asked for you. That broke me. Not the arrest. Not the headlines.
That.
He asked for me. The jail was in downtown Dallas.
Gray. Cold.
Quiet in a heavy way. I had to empty my purse. Take off my shoes. Walk through metal detectors. The guard led me to a small room with a thick glass wall. Then they brought him in. Orange jumpsuit. No watch. No suit. No power. Just Ethan. He sat down slowly and picked up the phone on his side of the glass. I picked up mine. For a second, neither of us spoke. He looked tired. Older. Hi, Mom, he said. Not Mrs. Miller. Not Linda.
Mom.
I felt tears fall before I could stop them. What did you do? I whispered. He shook his head slightly. It's not that simple. Then make it simple. He looked down at his cuffed wrists resting on the metal table. When you build something that big, that fast, investors expect growth. Every quarter. No excuses. So you lied? I asked quietly. I adjusted projections. That's not what the news is saying. They don't understand how pressure works. His voice cracked on the last word. Pressure. I thought about the dinner, about the check, about his need to prove he owed no one. How long? I asked. He hesitated. 2 years. 2 years of fake numbers. 2 years of pride covering cracks. And the board? I asked. They knew some of it. Some of it. The silence between us grew heavy. I didn't mean for this to happen, he said finally. When you pulled out that contract, it triggered due diligence.
Audits.
Questions. Things moved fast. My stomach dropped. So I had pulled the first thread. But the sweater had already been rotten. I didn't call the FBI, I said. I know. For the first time since the restaurant, his voice had no edge. Just truth. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. He laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Tell you what? That I was drowning in billions. You were drowning alone. He looked up at me then, and I saw it.
Shame. Real shame.
They're saying I could face 20 years, he said quietly.
20.
I gripped the phone tighter. That won't happen, I said, even though I had no idea if that was true. The guard tapped his watch. Time was almost up. Mom, Ethan said quickly, there's something else. My heart raced. The board is trying to remove you. Remove me? They're claiming your ownership stake is invalid. They filed an emergency motion this morning. Of course they did. If I still owned 15%, and if fraud was proven, I wasn't just his mother. I was a major shareholder. With power. They think you'll sell cheap to cover legal costs, he said. Will I? I asked. He looked at me carefully. I don't know who you are right now. That hurt. Because I didn't fully know either. The guard signaled again. Ethan leaned closer to the glass. Mom, if they offer you a deal, don't trust them. Why? His eyes darkened. Because I wasn't the only one adjusting numbers. The phone line clicked. Visit over. I sat there even after he was led away. My son wasn't just arrogant. He had been surrounded, pressured, maybe even pushed. When I stepped outside the jail, cameras were waiting. Mrs. Miller, are you standing by your son? Did your ownership trigger the investigation? Will you sell your shares? I didn't answer. I drove home slowly. When I pulled into my driveway, a black car was already there. Not federal. Not media. A man in a gray suit stood by my porch. Polished smile. Expensive shoes. He extended his hand. Mrs. Miller, I represent the board of Miller Tech.
Board.
Of course. I'm authorized to make you a very generous offer for your shares, he said smoothly. How generous? Enough to keep you comfortable for life. Comfortable. Like I was a retiree they could silence. And if I say no? I asked. His smile thinned slightly. The company may pursue legal action to invalidate your claim. Litigation can be exhausting. A threat, wrapped in silk. I looked at my small house. At the yard where Ethan once played. At the sky turning orange over Dallas. Come inside, I said calmly. He seemed surprised, but he followed.
We sat at my kitchen table.
The same one Ethan did homework on. He slid a folder toward me. Numbers. Agreements. Buyout terms. If I signed, I would walk away rich. Quiet. Invisible. If I refused, I would face $1 billion legal machine. I picked up the pen. The man watched closely. And just as I was about to speak, my front door burst open. 2 federal agents stepped inside. Mrs. Miller? One asked sharply. My heart slammed. Yes. You need to come with us.
Now.
The board member stood up fast. What is this? The agent held up another warrant. This concerns your involvement in Miller Tech's financial filings. My blood turned cold. Involvement. I whispered. The agent's eyes were firm. You are listed as a founding partner. The room spun. The board member slowly stepped back. Silent. Watching. And I realized something terrifying. They weren't just going after my son. They were coming for me too. And this time, I was the one being escorted to the car. The neighbors watched again. But this time it was me. Federal agents guiding me down my own porch steps. Cameras flashing. Microphones shoved in my face. Mrs. Miller, were you involved in the fraud? Did you help falsify reports? The board member stood in my doorway. Quiet. Satisfied. I finally understood. This wasn't panic. It was strategy. They couldn't silence me with money. So they tried to bury me with blame. Inside the federal building in downtown Dallas, they placed me in a gray interview room. Cold metal table. Bright lights. No warmth. An agent sat across from me. Mrs. Miller, your name is on early formation documents. You are legally a founding partner. That means you had fiduciary responsibility. I never worked there, I said. Did you review financial statements?
No.
Did you approve projections?
No.
He leaned back. Then why didn't you remove yourself officially? Because I trusted my son. But I didn't say that. Instead, I said, because I didn't know I needed to. Hours passed. Then my phone was returned to me. One missed call. Daniel Harper, Ethan's lawyer. When I called back, his voice was urgent. Mrs. Miller, do not sign anything. The board is attempting to shift liability onto you. I figured that, I said quietly. They need a scapegoat. Someone less powerful. Someone sympathetic enough to distract. A mother. Of course. I closed my eyes. For years, I protected Ethan from everything. Now I had to protect both of us from the people around him. What do? I asked. There was a pause. You used the one thing they underestimated, he said. And what's that? Your ownership. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I read every document, every early filing, every email Ethan had ever forwarded me, just in case. And I found something, buried in an old folder from years ago, an amendment proposal the board tried to push through quietly. It required majority partner approval. They never got mine, which meant every financial restructuring after that, technically challengeable by me. The next morning, instead of hiding, I called a press conference outside the federal courthouse in Dallas. Reporters came fast. They expected tears, apologies, maybe a confession. Instead, I walked to the podium calmly. My name is Linda Miller, I said clearly into the microphones. And I am a legal founding partner of Miller Tech. Murmurs. Cameras zoomed in. I did not falsify documents. I did not approve projections. And I did not receive dividends tied to inflated earnings. I held up copies of the unsigned amendment. But I did discover that the board attempted structural changes without full partner authorization.
Gasps.
The same board now trying to shift blame onto me. I paused. Every lens was focused. If there was fraud, it was not a mother cooking books in her kitchen. It was executives protecting bonuses. Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. I am filing a civil action today, I continued, to freeze executive asset transfers and request a full independent forensic audit. That was the moment everything changed. Because freezing executive assets meant one thing. No golden parachutes. No secret exits. No escaping with millions while blaming my son. By evening, the board members' personal accounts were under review. 2 resigned within 48 hours. 1 attempted to transfer funds overseas. Too late. The federal investigators shifted focus. The narrative changed. Not greedy mother. Not family power struggle.
But
board misconduct deepens. And then came the real turning point. Ethan's detention hearing. The courtroom was full. Dallas federal court. Wood benches. High ceilings. Whispers everywhere. Ethan stood beside his attorney. No suit. Still in custody. He looked smaller.
Human.
The prosecution spoke about inflated numbers. About misleading investors. But then Daniel Harper stood. Your Honor, he said calmly. New evidence indicates executive-level coordination in financial misrepresentation. He handed over documentation. My documentation. The judge adjusted her glasses. The room felt like it stopped breathing. If the court allows, Daniel continued, we request consideration that Mr. Miller was operating under board-imposed growth mandates and compensation structures tied to aggressive projections. Not innocent, but not alone. The judge granted temporary supervised release, pending deeper investigation. Ethan was not free, but he was not abandoned. Outside the courthouse, he walked toward me slowly. No cameras close enough to hear us. Just us. Why? He asked quietly. Why fight for me? I looked at him for a long moment. Because you're my son, I said. But don't confuse that with approval. He nodded. For the first time in years. No arrogance. No power. Just humility. Over the next months, the audit revealed everything. Emails. Pressure campaigns. Executive bonuses tied to artificial milestones. The board members who mocked me at dinner? They lost their positions, their reputations, their assets frozen during investigation. One faced criminal charges. The empire didn't collapse. It restructured. Ethan stepped down as CEO.
Publicly.
On camera. I made decisions I regret, he said during the press conference. I let growth matter more than integrity. I let pride silence wisdom. Then he did something no one expected.
He turned to me.
In trying to repay my mother with money, I forgot that I can never repay her with numbers. There were no claps. Just truth. The company survived. Smaller. Humbled. Ethan's net worth?
Gone.
Legal fees.
Settlements.
Share dilution. He wasn't a billionaire anymore. Not even close. The mansion in Highland Park was sold. The jet was sold. The cars were auctioned. He moved into a modest townhouse in Plano. And for the first time since he was 19, he came to my house without an assistant, without an agenda. One evening, months later, he sat at my kitchen table. The same scratched wood. He placed something in front of me. Not a check. A handwritten letter. I was wrong, he said simply. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just honest. I thought success meant not owing anyone. But I owe you everything. I didn't tear this paper. I held it. Because this time, it wasn't about money. The greatest humiliation he ever felt wasn't losing his fortune. It was standing in a courtroom realizing the only person who didn't abandon him was the one he tried to erase. And the board members who thought they could use me? They underestimated a mother who had survived poverty, abandonment, and sleepless nights. They thought I was weak because I was quiet. But quiet doesn't mean powerless. Revenge isn't always screaming. Sometimes it's standing firm until truth crushes arrogance. My son lost billions. He lost status. He lost applause. But he gained something he never understood before. Character. And I gained something too. Respect. Not from the world. From him. If you learned anything from this story, let it be this. Money can build towers. But pride can burn them down overnight. Never treat the hands that lifted you like debts to repay. And never underestimate a woman who knows her worth. If this story moved you, if you believe humility matters more than wealth, make sure you subscribe. Because some lessons cost billions to learn. And some stories are too important not to be told.